call the meeting to order. Ask everyone to please rise and join with me in saying to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Public notice of this meeting has been given by the Secretary in the following manner. Posted on the bulletin board in the Borough Clerk's office and mailed to the retrospect newspaper. Newspaper is designated for that purpose. Secretary, roll call, please.
Dickinson.
Here.
Alvarez.
Here.
Beatrice. Playhammer.
Here.
Lucius. Here. Fullerton.
Here.
Wachowski.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Walker.
Here.
Mr. Carl here.
David Rowland, sitting in for Mr. Carter, here.
And John Pettit.
Here.
Thank you. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes of February 8th?
Yes, Chairman.
Is there any additions or corrections? If so, the meeting's in order, the motion's in order.
Make a motion.
Motion made by the mayor, seconded by Candy Playhammer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the immediate stand is ready. We have a postponed application from Mr. John D. Burkowski from 93 North Reed Avenue. Are you here, sir?
Yes.
To advance and
You come up, Joe.
tell us what you want to do. Have you received this letter from Mr. Pettit referencing your application?
Yes, sir. And, Mr. Chairman, if you approve, I'd like to swear in this, the applicant.
Very good.
Additional testimony.
Thank you, Mr.
Sir, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give tonight is truthful and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And, sir, this involves a property owned by Mr. Burke, your neighbor, is that correct?
Yes.
Is Mr. Burke here this evening?
Yes.
Yes. If you could have Mr. Burke, please rise and come up. When I was reviewing this application, Mr. Chairman and board members, I did not see a consent signed by by Mr. Burke. And I'm sure you don't want to do a subdivision on somebody's ground without consent. So if Mr. Burke, you are the owner of property located at the 97 North Reed Avenue in Runnymede, and are you consenting to this application? And you understand if the subdivision is granted, part of your ground is going to be consolidated with your, okay, thank you. All right. And you also understand if it's granted tonight that you will have to present a deed to the borough within 150 days, 2 deeds prepared, so that the board chairman and secretary can sign this.
Yes.
Thank you. And you say you do have a copy of the letter from Mr. Pettit, right?
Yes.
And he has really delineated a lot of restrictions, not restrictions, but additions to your original application. Are you, John, would you like to speak? Yeah, go through them, please, and see where we stand.
It really comes down to a couple of comments that we had. The letter dated March 6th. And page 2, we note that it's one of the months. The existing shed that has a 24-foot setback from the property line with 5 feet required, that's the existing non-conforming, it's not being changed or exacerbated by this application. Under review comments, there's some information missing from the zoning schedule that's to be added to the plan. He asked that in the area where the motorhome will be stored, that the concrete driveway apron and the sidewalk be replaced. We did get a sketch from the applicant. He dropped it off to our house. I believe it's sufficient. It shows that it would be a 6-inch thick concrete apron and that the sidewalk would be replaced with 6-inch thick concrete so that when the motorhome goes across it, it doesn't damage it. I believe you agree with that?
Yes.
On page 3, same thing, I talked about the sidewalk. And then on Number 4, we just question whether any kind of screening is being proposed from the neighboring property. Is there anything being proposed?
Well, on where the motorhome sits at is already on crushed stone, stones that's in there, and that drains there. That's where it sits, it doesn't sit on grass, it's hooked up to.
Where the motorhome will be stored is the rear of Mr. Burke's property.
And he's here, and he doesn't have an objection, I don't think it's
Myself and Mr. Ogre, we visited the site, and everything, our observations were the same as yours. We, of course, didn't know what engineering would require as far as the thickness of the concrete, the width of the apron, et cetera.
Well, like I said, they gave us a sketch. We have to talk to Public Works, make sure they're okay with it, and then the sketch, the details should be added to the plan and called out, where it's being constructed. And then the last comment we had was whether or not the area where the vehicles will be stored should be, I know it's gravel now, whether or not it needs to be paved. And then strictly if we're considering whether or not we should have paved. Maybe existence is probably okay the way it is, but we bring it up because the ordinance requires paved surface, so, the design would.
Does the ordinance require concrete?
No, just a hard packed surface.
Okay. How do you feel about that, Mr. Dubrowski?
Well,
What is your desire?
I'd like to leave it there because it's been there.
Like to leave it as gravel?
Yes, if I could.
Of course, you know you're going to need a waiver from the board.
What's that waiver for?
Okay.
John, if we added an impervious surface to that area, would that give any negative runoff to
Well, it's a
the
small
neighbors?
area. I don't know that it would cause any problems, but it would result in more runoff coming off the lot.
So if we leave it to gravel, it will be less non-impervious surface and less of a chance of the neighbor getting some water in the yard.
And it wouldn't change the makeup of the neighborhood in case there's a conveyance at a later date. I mean, I don't know how long that motorhome is, but trailer behind it's got to be, what, 50 feet?
It's 37 feet plus one.
37?
But the apron that he's asking to have is 20 feet wide, and I think that's, it's kind of wide. I think that, 15 feet apron is sufficient to back that in there. 20 feet is kind of wide.
Are there any other broken pieces of pavement?
Well, when we moved in the house in 1993, there were several broken pieces of sidewalk, and we asked the realtor and the builder, why didn't they fix that? And they said that they only replaced what they had damaged, but we have pictures back in 1993 where there were a lot of sections that were cracked and broken that are still in that today. So, we'll go ahead and replace the sidewalk if you want to. I have no problem with that. And we put an apron in there. What's wrong with that? 20 feet is kind of wide. I just asked the waiver for this crushed stone, and maybe a 15-foot apron would be fine because I could get in there. It's not a problem.
The advantage to the crushed stone is if they do end up selling the home in the future and the next person doesn't need it.
A lot of people have, and some people have concrete driveways, and some people just have the crushed stone. I think on a conveyance, the next person taking the house is going to be able to use the lot for just removing stone and not concrete.
I agree. And then the last comment is just your fees that have to be provided for borough engineering, just the tax map, so just a and that's the extent of our review. Obviously, these can be claims for
Take a look, Mr. Burke owns a very large lot. You're going up to what, 70 feet now? From 50? From his house to the corner, it's like 130 feet, so not really going to upset or crowd the neighborhood in any way, shape, or form. And I think having a motorhome off the street is a lot better than trying to keep it out on the street. The amount of room it takes up. Anyone from the board have any questions for Mr. Duke?
Chairman?
Anyone open the meeting now to the public? Does anyone have any questions for this applicant? Any people have been noticed? Hearing none, I'll move that the public portion of the meeting be closed.
Second.
All those in favor? Waters, public portion is now closed. Mr. O'Hare, do you have anything?
No comment, what the board would be voting on tonight would be a minor subdivision pursuant to a plan previously submitted and subject to the comments of the township engineer, or the borough engineer, and you would be granting, or the applicant has requested a waiver from our ordinance section 375-2, which requires appears impervious surface, allowing to surface the area where the truck will be stored to be a gravel parking area.
Thank you.
I make a motion that we vote on the proposed ordinance
With the waiver grant?
with, to approve the grant and the waiver. Yeah.
Is there a second? Second. Motion made by Candy Clehammer, second by Ron Fulton. All those in favor? Oh, no, roll call vote, I'm sorry.
Dickinson,
Yes.
Alvarez,
Yes.
Playhammer.
Yes.
Walperly.
Yes.
Chowski.
Yes.
Bushian.
I was not here last month, is that when the original?
It wasn't heard last
No,
month.
it's tabled.
It was tabled because the engineer didn't have enough time to look at it.
All right, yes. Dunn.
Yes.
And, Fullerton.
Yes.
Devoted.
Yes.
All in favor? The ayes have it. Mr. Lukowski, go home and make room for your motor home and make it nice. Thank you.
Remember, gentlemen, send those deeds in within 150 days.
We'll take care of that, yep, no problem. Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is a subdivision, an application for land approvals Group Incorporated. You'll have to stand down.
How many, the applicant's attorney would like to know, Paul, how many members we have that can vote?
We have one member who was noticed that he's going to stand down,
Okay.
and
Mayor stands down.
because it's a deed variance, the mayor is not permitted. We have an alternate, Mr. Obert is the first alternate, we don't have two
He can
alternates.
vote, and he's not subject to disqualification, so he's a member for anybody on that.
Thank you, Ron. One, two, three, four, five, six. You need five.
Full board, Mr. Chairman.
We're short one alternate.
Okay, we're short one all, so the full board is not. You want a D variance, 5 votes. Five affirmative.
Mr. Rowan, I'd like the record to indicate that Mr. Obert is a voter this evening.
Okay, yes, he's filling it, so he will be
There's
voting.
been questions here on previous
I
applications.
understand that.
I am we're making sure that the audience knows that Obert is going to vote this evening.
As long as he was a sworn.
If the applicant proceeds.
Chairman, that's fine. Do you want to swear in?
If I can just put on the record. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Brian Lezout, on behalf of the applicant, Land Approvals Group LLC. The application before you is for a density variance, a D5 variance. which requires a supermajority of the board, which in this case would be 5 votes. In that we would only have 7 members this evening. We would defer our application until the full membership of the board is present.
But if we only lost, the member that left, and that's because he was noticed.
No, I understand, but with all due respect, in order for the board to approve this application this evening, we need 5 affirmative votes of the board.
Well, how many votes are here? 7, right?
That's all, sir, that's all you're going to have. Mr. Dickerson is here. Mayor Calvadas cannot vote, she's mayor. Mr. Beatrice will not be able to vote because he's a member of council. I can vote, Mrs. Sushin can vote. Mr. Fulton will not be able to vote, he has to recuse himself because he was noticed. Mr. Pachowski is here, Mr. Gunn is here, Mr. Ockley is here, and Mr. Ober is here. That's the board. I don't know.
I don't know that you would improve their lot.
No, there's no one else.
And that would be 7 members.
That's correct.
If we had 2 alternates, you would have it.
Yeah, you don't have, because Mr. Fulton was noticed, he lives within 200 of the
I
properties.
understand.
That's where you lost your additional vote. We have no choice but to allow him to recuse himself.
That makes it easy.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, everybody stay tuned. Board of Business.
Would it be improper for me to ask one question before we start of the applicant? Mr. Lazook, we have 2 different newspaper notices.
That's correct.
And I can't see a difference.
The only difference is the actual hearing date.
Oh, okay.
And if I could just for a moment, again, reintroduce myself, Brian Lazook, on behalf of the applicant, Land Approvals Group. Notice was provided on 2 separate occasions, which has been forwarded to the clerk. I do have the original certified green cards, which the board clerk has requested. And Mr. Chairman, to your point, the original hearing that was scheduled by the board was in January. We were advised that the board may or may not have had a solicitor appointed at the time. We agreed to adjourn the meeting.
Correct.
I was also advised after that hearing date that there were residents in the audience that claimed that they were not properly notified. My office received an updated property owners list from the Borough of Runnymede, at which time we submitted a revised and updated affidavit of service, which was filed with the clerk. I thought it appropriate at that time to renotice in the Courier Post for the new hearing date this evening, and that's the reason why there were 2 separate notices. Legally, we were not required to.
Strictly a housekeeping thing to make sure you comply with.
Well, again, I didn't want there to be any confusion. If there were residents that were inadvertently omitted from the original list, they had another opportunity to review that in the Courier Post.
Well, I don't think there was a whole lot of things. I only got 1 call. Why didn't you notice?
I believe it was Davis Road. Yes. So I believe that answers your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
The application before you this evening is fairly straightforward. We're requesting a density or D5 variance, and specifically a variance, a density variance to permit 59 units where your ordinance would permit 55. We submitted a concept mixed-use density plan, which details 32 single-family residential dwellings, along with 27 townhomes that are proposed. That obviously gets you to the 59 units. Under your ordinance, there is a density provision which provides a maximum density of 3 density units per gross acre. When you calculate the 59 units that we are proposing this evening, there's a small deviation of 3.24. So again, your ordinance permits 3 units, density units per gross acre. We are asking the board to permit 3.24, which translates into residential units 4. That is the only application before you this evening. It's important to understand that should the board grant a favorable approval this evening, we would still be required to appear before the board for site plan and major subdivision approval. What led us to our application before you this evening really stems from an informal appearance we made last June before the board. Last June, we appeared shortly after your ordinance, I believe that was ordinance 2-2011 was adopted, which incorporated revisions to your zoning ordinance, specifically within the R3 residential zone. That ordinance permitted for the first time townhomes. However, there's a glaring deficiency which we brought to the attention of the board and the township committee, that there are no bulk standards or any other engineering standards that will govern the development of townhomes. There are with respect to residential dwellings. However, when an engineer is engineering a plan for the townhomes, there are no standards by which to engineer the plan. There were, we are informed, draft bulk standards that were prepared by your, I believe, township engineer, Leah Fury from Mr. Bob's office. For whatever reason, those bulk requirements related to townhomes were not adopted. Had they been adopted, we've essentially submitted to you this evening a conforming plan. But obviously that is not the case, and the single limited issue that this board is being asked to decide is only with respect to density. Again, the density that we are requesting, which is 3.24 units a gross acre versus what the ordinance provides at 3 units a gross acre.
The draft copy we have in our possession, those members of the board that were here during the master plan update, had the density in there for, had the description in there for townhomes. When we sent, and I have copies of the past chairman's communications to the Leah Fury, who was hired by Bob Associates to do the update in the master plan, we specifically removed townhouses. Removed the density, and removed the requirement for townhouses. Now, what you're asking me, as far as what I can understand, is you want a deviation from the standard that doesn't exist.
No, that's not the case. That would be true if we were before you on a site plan or subdivision approval. And I believe Mr. Pettit would concur with that. The only issue we're before you this evening on is the density component of our application, which is, again, we are proposing 59 units, where your ordinance for density would only permit 55.
Well, my understanding was that when you had your last application in here, it was for, I think you had the 55 R3 requirement. You had 80 by 100 square, 8,000 square feet, and the application was only for 55 homes.
That's correct.
No townhouse.
But remember, Mr. Chairman, that application was filed over 2 years ago. It was March 2010. Your ordinance was changed in April of 2011, last year, to specifically permit townhomes. And that's important for the board to understand. The townhomes that we have submitted to before you this evening, they are a permitted principal use within the R3 zoning district. They were not permitted in 2010. They are specifically permitted as a recognized permitted use.
They were only put in there during the draft ordinances that we were working on.
That is a problem, because you have the Township Council adopted ordinance 1102 on April 5th to specifically include townhomes. Your ordinance, your zoning ordinance, as it reads today, specifically includes
The,
townhomes.
the definition was in there, right? How many other things were in that definition? Wasn't there other things in there too?
Mr. Chairman, at this point, the applicant is right. The ordinance does permit townhomes, and he's also right that there are no design standards. So when we review the application, even though it's only here for a density of 59 versus 55, you know, in order to have the board, give the board the ability to grant that, the applicant still has to meet the land use requirements, which, you know, he has to show that the impact of the deviation on adjacent properties, and he has to show that the impact and demonstrate that it will not cause such damage to the character of the neighborhood as to constitute substantial detriment to the public good. And then he also has to demonstrate that if the board were to grant the variance, that it would not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. Now, one of the problems with submitting for a density variance but not identifying, unless they're sure that this is where the townhomes are going to be located, assuming that at some point in the future, the board grants the myriad of variances associated with them, because again, there are no standards in the ordinance. The townhome, the way the ordinance is written right now, has to meet the same design criteria and zoning as a single-family home. So every one of these townhomes, you can see in my review, has variances for lot size, lot width, separation of buildings, the whole host of issues associated with that. And that's a result of there not being any design standards for the townhomes at this point. But again, I guess my question is, you're asking the board to consider a density variance for townhomes, which is, I guess, the only way you can get that number, 59, on this property. But the board's not being asked to act on the variances associated with those townhomes.
That's because we are entitled, and in fact, it was the suggestion of this board last June that we bifurcate the application to seek the density variance and then come in on the site plan and subdivision issues. We took that to heart from the simple fact that if you were to engineer this plan based upon the omitted standards, there would be one variance required.
No, I bet that there was nothing omitted. We was told her to take it out of there. It wasn't omitted. There's no omission. If you want me to talk about a deviation, I think land use law says it has to be similar or the same. You're surrounded by
Mr.
planned
Chairman,
unit
with all due
development.
respect, I would agree with you if townhomes were omitted from the ordinance. But the ordinance was specifically adopted to include, I'll read, single-family detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, which are duplexes, townhouses, in addition to municipal building structures and outdoor public recreation. So there was a conscious decision of the Borough Council to include townhomes as a permitted use within the R3 development.
We took our case to Borough Council after Mr. Samos came in and challenged something, right? We took our case, myself, previous chairman, president of the council, our borough solicitor, Jack Kennedy, and the mayor. We all sat down in this back and we talked about that. And they said they're going to leave it up to the board on what we permit and what you give approvals for. I submit to you that it's surrounded by R2, which is 20,000 square feet, by R1, which is 6,000 square feet. In the middle of it, you've got R3, which now is 8,000 square feet. Why would we, in good conscience, consider townhomes when it's not similar or even remotely?
But again, Mr. Chairman, townhomes are a permitted use. This board cannot deny the right to build townhomes within any R3 residential property. It is a permitted use.
It's not. If you look at the R3 code,
I would defer to your solicitor.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of agree with the argument and what the engineer said. The ordinance that was adopted, planning board had no, they might have an input into it, but it was what the borough council did, states what the purpose of the residential R3 district is. And it says it's the intent of the R3 district to encourage clustered single-family and townhouse development types. Now, the unfortunate thing is when it does give standards for single-family residence, but if we look, when we see minimum lot size using clusters, conservation design, or minimum open space area for cluster conservation design, it's marked NA, which is either not applicable or, not available. So what the ordinance is saying is yes, to a developer, it's permitted, but we haven't given you the standards to which you have to comply, which would put a developer at a disadvantage. Now, you as a planning board and the accommodation zoning planning board have the right then to develop those standards or approve a lot size. It couldn't be unreasonable, and it couldn't be unreasonable or capricious. It would have to be within some standards that are reasonable. But unfortunately, the engineer is correct and the applicant's attorney is correct. Our ordinance says that townhouses are permitted. It would be like if we told somebody, look, you can build a house on this lot, or you can build a house on this street, but we're not going to tell you how big or how big the lot is or what the setbacks have to be. So that there's no standard. So because there's no standard for what the borough's adopted, is that unfair to an applicant or an owner of that property?
Well, what would you say to the fact that borough has already agreed to a specifically R3 residential standard?
Yes, that is unequivocal. That's what they adopted by ordinance. But they set forth what their intent was with that ordinance.
And then I'll go further and say to this, that it was at best poor draftsmanship, because I have the copy of all the correspondence from the previous chairman to Leah Fury, and it was to delete townhouses from the R3 standard.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Chairman, it didn't get deleted, and, I mean, I have all my notes, I'm not for or against anything on the space of the plan, but I'm just saying.
It did get deleted in that one too.
But you're looking here at the master plan here,
So do I.
and I have our notes where we talked about adopting standards when we did a draft review. And I think that we really need to, whether it's this applicant or an applicant 2 years from now, I think we have to be proactive in adopting standards, be it for this gentleman or for the next person down the road. We do have townhouses written in there, and it's just like we spoke about renewable energy. We had the same conversation in our draft of the master plan, that we don't want to just have it out there. It's okay to have solar panels on your front yard with no standards. I think if we do this, it's our job to be proactive and set some standards, not just for this applicant, but for applicants going forward.
And Mr. Chairman, to be honest, very candid with the applicant, even if he was granted a density variance tonight, it's conditioned on a site plan approval by this board, which could, it's no guarantee you would get 59 units. You would understand that. I mean, after the site was developed, and if there was open areas that the board decided were important to the community on an overall basis, and in consideration of what the intent of the ordinance says, that it's, to balance residential development with common open space, they might not be able to get 59 units on it.
Right, you understand that?
Yes,
Okay.
but again,
We have nothing in front of us that we're voting upon except this density issue. So just if you do get an approval, it's not guaranteeing anything but that density variance.
yes, and the reason for our appearance this evening was, number one, at the suggestion of the board last year, But number two, I believe the solicitor and your engineer.
Was that at an informal meeting, or was that at?
Yes, it was at an informal meeting last June before the board.
I understood that the application was withdrawn, I don't remember.
No, that is, again, the application from March of 2010, when townhomes were not permitted.
I'm talking about the one in June of this year.
Mr. Samos came in and he stood right there and he said.
Mr. Samos came in and waved the paper at us that he had, why don't
We
you
told him
guys
that,
do
we
this?
referred back to mayor and
Again,
council.
Mr. Chairman, I appeared with Mr. Samos, and we presented an informal application which depicted both townhomes and single-family dwellings, not far different from the application before you this evening. Now, it's important to realize that I've pre-marked as A1 and A2. After that meeting, there were two separate attempts that we made for the board and council to amend the ordinance to include standards for townhomes.
We referred Mr. Samos back to mayor and council that evening.
Right. So there were two separate letters that were addressed to the mayor to rectify this situation. Because believe me, we fully understand that it puts the board in a difficult position without standards to evaluate a plan. But you have to appreciate it from our perspective that we are still essentially in the same boat. We do not have standards by which to engineer townhomes. Now, the application or the plan before you this evening, that plan was engineered based on the townhome standards that were recommended by the township planner,
But not about,
but not adopted. That's correct.
That's correct.
okay.
They were recommended to, but not adopted.
But that is a glaring deficiency in your ordinance. It puts the board at a disadvantage, and it certainly puts any potential developer of townhomes in your township at a disadvantage. We cannot hit a moving target. There has to be clear or, defined standards by which to engineer these plans.
Isn't there also something in that 1102 ordinance that has a caveat in it about mistakes or misprints or something like that?
No, Mr. Chairman. Again, that ordinance was adopted close to a year ago with no modifications or revisions that we're aware of.
Okay, maybe I just don't understand how we can do this.
Well, I think all we can do is vote on what's in front of us today, and then I think we really have to get together and look at the standards that Boston Associates and Leah Fury had put in place, and see if we agree, disagree,
But
what can we do?
again, let me hang my hat on this, okay? This is the letter that we submitted to Leah Fury by the former chairman, right? And in here, it makes specific reference to Appendix D draft, Part 3 zoning regulations. Under the Vulcan area regulations, column headed by cluster conversion, subdivision for single-family units, and under the column townhouse units are to be eliminated. So they were supposed to be eliminated. Now, if poor draftsmanship got that thing in there, then I don't feel like I'm responsible for it.
But you are, because it is the current code. That is part of your zoning code. Townhomes, again, are a permitted use. And with all due respect, this is an issue that the board and the council has been aware of for close to a year. And until there are appropriate bulk regulations adopted, neither the board nor any applicant proposing townhomes has any clear guidance on how they are to be engineered. Because it is virtually impossible, if not, certainly unfeasible, to develop townhomes with your current R3 district regulations. And I believe Mr. Pettit would concur with that.
Well, the variance of each one.
Even if the board, as they were saying, the standards on your own, unless they're adopted by ordinance by council, they're not in the zone. You can use them as guidelines, I guess, in your evaluation of variance.
Usually, it would be reflected in a variance that you would, a bulk variance that you give the applicant.
Let's give somebody 50-foot
Standards
frontage.
down. Right.
It's like us allowing 50-foot frontage on a case-by-case basis. We would be doing standards for this applicant on these townhouses alone. It wouldn't be for future applicants. It would be, if this application would stand on its own, the standards that we set forth for this application will stand on their own. They will be a case-by-case basis going forward, unless mayor and council were to adopt the standards that were recommended. It's going
That's correct.
to be a case-by-case basis no matter what. I mean, we have to
I
do
believe,
something.
Mr.
It's
Chairman,
way
the
out,
only
but
free track left
Yeah.
is now.
The only developable property
Yeah,
that
the only
we,
developable vacant part for this.
but there are restrictions,
Yes, yeah.
there's wetlands and everything else.
And that's one of the site plan that was submitted. That would have to, the delineation map would have to be provided. So in my opinion, whether you grant the applicant this request or not, I don't think really, he understands we're not approving 59 lots. He understands.
But you are, because there has to be a defined standard from which we engineer a plan. Now, obviously, if there are environmental considerations that would restrict the development, then obviously the board is not, tied to the 59. And, that certainly is, and that's a very good point.
But I don't think the board doesn't want to be tied in and say, well, if we vote in favor of you tonight, we're going to get 59 lots. I think that's what they have.
Until we discuss the standards.
Yeah, until we know what the standards are.
Right.
But again, we've been waiting.
I know, I don't understand. I know, it's like they thought, Jason said, I understand that. So the only thing that we could do, I could recommend, is the board's got to advise council that this is a problem, there's a deficiency, and set standards some way, or the board's gonna have to take it on a case-by-case, lot-by-lot, and grant variances, and kind of incorporate their own standards, or what they're happy with, into bulk variances that you would give for, well, it's 27 lots. But the board would have the right to determine how much open space, if you're doing.
No, that's not true. Open space is not permitted under the short order states.
But the ordinance.
It's unenforceable.
Okay, all right, well, I'm not gonna argue that with you now, but there may be other standards. If you're asking them to do a standard for lots, there may be other things they want to consider that might be not in your favor.
We don't have a plan in front of us, guys. You know what I mean? Like, right now, we don't really have exactly what you want to do in front of this, and, we're not trying to stonewall.
Well, we would be willing, I believe, to adjourn the application for a period of a month until the board would be in a position to adopt standards by which we were able to move forward. Is that reasonable?
This board would have to recommend the town council.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
I know then there would be at least 2 readings. I don't know if that could be done in a month.
For the record, if you want to swear, this is Rail Ford project.
You solemnly swear that your testimony you're about to give tonight before this board is truthful, not to the best of your knowledge.
Yes, sir, I do. My name is Ralph Ford. I live at 11 Robin Road, Mount Holly, New Jersey.
Ford?
Ford, F-O-R-D. I'm the project manager, been involved with this project since day one. What I would offer to the board is this. If the board were to recommend up to council that they pursue, and actually the council would, correct me if I'm wrong, councilors, you would recommend back to the town council. Town council would then direct to this board recommendations or standards to be adopted, which then would go back to town council for adoption and incorporation into the ordinance.
Just so you know, before when we read this draft of the master plan, we did send some stuff up to mayor and council. Leah Fury sent it over to mayor and council to be voted on, and that's my knowledge.
Mr. Ford, didn't you attend one of our meetings here?
Yes, sir, I was here during the master plan.
You gave no comment, you offered no comment, you just here.
Actually, I requested to comment that night, and the board solicitor told me that I was not to receive a comment, that I would be able to comment at another time.
The board, she brought that to the planning board, and the planning board said
Really,
that we could be here, but we didn't want to hear any testimony.
your meeting was a work session at that point in time. I was advised that the public comment was inappropriate that night, and was asked not to comment. We requested also to be advised of that time and frame when I could make testimony and or at least comment on the adoption of the master plan, and I was asked to be notified of that subsequent. We never did. Whether I should appear or not, really not the point. What I'm not saying right now is this board is going to ask council to direct it to consider standards which town council can adopt and incorporate into an ordinance, we'd be willing to pull and/or continue our application, knowing that as soon as you had a set of draft standards, we could sit down, because this applicant, we are not people that do not work with boards. We are willing to sit down with the board, look and work in concept plans. We'd be willing to come back and work on concept portion of the plan. So which time, by the time that the application is heard again, maybe we would need a density variance, but we also would have to try to do the hearing.
Well, we've already been there, and Mayor and Cap, they said, okay.
Well, I guess I don't know how to engineer an 8,000 square foot townhouse. Somebody has to show me how to do that. When you show me how to do that, I'll take my plans. But I don't know how to design an 8,000 square foot townhouse.
Well, I'm really confused because I thought once we took all the standards out of here, that it was a moot point.
I guess, as you said, and everybody has, dogs wagging the tail. I don't know where how to proceed, sir. And so what I'm saying is, we will continue our application if in fact we know that a good faith effort is being made to adopt a set of standards. At that point in time, we can have input on what those standards are, and we could be working on a concept plan that this board would be happy to entertain. And by doing that, we would also end up eliminating the need for a possible bifurcation of the hearing, where we could sit down, hammer out what units, so that when you did grant any variances, it would be with site plan in hand, you would know exactly what you're doing. But I'm not gonna move a building over here. You would be looking at plans that Mr. Pettit could comment on, and also comment properly on, because he has no standard by which to review our plan.
I think the standards actually put more, not to say power, but they put a little bit more, ability in our hands to decide what we do want, what we don't want. If we don't have any standards, I think we're working blind. I think the gentlemen out here are being asked to do a task that's almost impossible because they're spending a lot of money on engineering that they may have to redo. And I think if it's not decided on this application, it's not going to go away. I don't think the need for standards is ever going to go away.
But I think the applicant is asking us to operate as an agent for that, right? And
Well, what do we want to? Who do we want to make the standards? Do we want to send Leah's standards back to mayor and council and tell them that we are simply?
no, Lee's not on the payroll. She was only hired to have master plan update.
I understand that, but I would hope that we didn't put her list of standards in the treasure. I hope that we have a list of standards that she recommended.
They're still available.
You know, so whether this board reviews them and votes upon them, and it's for this applicant only, I just don't think that, you know, the white elephant in the corner is going to go away. I think something has to be addressed at some point in time, and whether it's application by application, or, I mean, I think I would kind of prefer, just like we have, you know, in the infill for the R1 area, you know, the standard is minimum of 6,000 feet, okay, but there's people that want, you know, 4,000 and 5,000, they have to get a variance. I would think it would be easier on us if we had a set of standards that were adopted by mayor and council in which we could change, adapt, tell them, because they do on a frontage or a setback.
I think we did that. We acted in the best interest of the borough, right? Not in the interest of, when we adopted the R3 standards for 80, 100, 80,000 square feet.
But the fact of the matter is, we still have an ordinance that's allowing townhouses, so what are we gonna do about that? What I'm getting at, you can't,
Well, suppose we take it back to mayor and council and they tell us that, okay, eliminate that word of it, and just allow it in R3.
well, I guess that's at their
To be 80
discretion.
by 100.
I guess that would be at their discretion, but something has to be done. We're at an
Like you said,
impasse here.
you're asking us to split the application in your interest, right? When we don't have, and as far as I'm concerned, any standards other than R3 for that thing.
But that is the problem of the borough, with all due respect. and not the
I
applicant.
would say,
Whether it's my client or another developer sitting in this seat.
I would say that there was poor draftsmanship, and draftsmanship is mentioned in the New Jersey Planning Official Guide that they teach all the new incoming members with. It mentions poor draftsmanship causing a lot of problems. And this is the only time for a D variance that we act as a zoning board. Otherwise, we're just planning.
No, I understand, Mr. Chairman, but again, it is not poor draftsmanship. The ordinance could not be clearer that it specifically lists the 5 principal uses, one of which are townhomes. And I'm sure your solicitor would greatly point that out. There is, however, glaring deficiency that the council did not adopt standards for townhomes. But
When
be
the
that as it
standards
may,
were in there, in the October iteration that we looked at, November, we told her to take them out. She didn't take them out, and it said references to townhomes, which appears in that piece of paper that you're making reference to.
But, Mr. Chairman, everything you say, I believe is true. However, that ordinance has been in effect for close to a year, and nothing has been done.
But it's never been challenged, it's never been looked at.
That's not true. That's absolutely not true. I just presented 2 letters where it was brought to the attention immediately.
Was there an application? Was there an application that said you want to put townhouses in there? The only application I'm familiar with that you wanted was, the review letter was May 21, 2010. It was for 55.
No, that would be March 2010. That was an application.
Well, this is one about the review from Mr. Pettit. You were asking for 55 R3 development, 80 by 108,000 square feet, without any townhouse.
Mr. Chairman, the original application that we reviewed had 55 single-family homes, but they were clustered. In other words, a lot of those.
That was also removed.
Also needed, but a lot of those homes needed variances for frontage, because what they tried to do is cluster them together, so that there was more open space. That was reviewed, there was a request by the applicant to have a subcommittee of the board talk about whether or not that's something the board would entertain. At the time, the board was not in favor of doing that. I don't know if Ralph has got in front of the board or came informally and then.
No, we requested an informal conference with the board and discussed the cluster concept of that application. We denied that ability. In fact, we were pretty much, with the exception of being granted permission to use a technical time, we were not allowed. We regretted not receiving the board's concept of that drawing.
Have you ever asked to appear and testify at any other planning board?
We have, we requested, in any other subdivision? In any other
I'm talking about planning board review documents that you think should be in this.
In regards to this application?
No, I'm talking about any.
Anywhere? Sir, I recently retired professional planner. I was an expert witness in court.
I'm not talking about, you're saying you represent your,
I am the project manager for this project.
okay.
I have history of.
But your interest
over
was-
100 different municipalities.
Your interest in getting that in our master plan, correct?
No, sir.
And why were you here?
I was here to see what the town was going to do so that I had an idea as how to proceed with my project. So it was in my interest to appear before the, and to sit here and observe the goings on to find out what was going to be adopted. As a contract developer for the property, I would be completely remiss in not paying attention to what the goings are in a community that I'd like to be a builder in. It's in my interest to do what this board and this town wants. It's not for me to come try to jam something down the board's throat. I want to work with the community, so I need standards, so that's why I came to the hearings. I would be remiss to do anything else.
It was the council, remember, that specifically included as a permitted use duplexes and townhomes within the R3 zoning district. That was the council's elective.
So it's there, and now we have got to deal with it. You can't sit here and chew on it and pretend it's going to go away. We have to talk about it, we have to deal with it, and we have to move on. I mean, to sit here and regurgitate the same 6 facts isn't achieving anything. It's in black and white, we have the ordinance. I have it here in front of me, whether, you know, it's proper that the borough didn't adopt standards. I want to see the borough adopt standards, or I want us to adopt standards. It's not fair for any developer trying to do what we want when they have no written standards of what we want. That's silly. We can't ask anyone to do that, and we're never going to get what we want if we don't tell them what we want. So in all fairness, we've got to sit here and decide tonight if we want to continue and send it back to mayor and council, what Leah Burry recommended as standards, and have them approve them, and then come back to us. And then we can sit there and look at them and say, okay, I agree with this, just like maybe we agree with a 50-foot lot frontage because it's in concert with the rest of the neighborhood. Or we can say, I don't agree with this because it's not in concert. Everybody else says 80-foot lot frontage. Because we get standards put in front of us, doesn't mean it's the end-all of what we are able to do with those standards. And you have to start somewhere.
And one point to consider, and I think this is a very important point. Had the council incorporated Ms. Fury's draft standards for townhomes, so if someone were to view your ordinance this evening and look at the bulk requirements for townhomes, it would identify those bulk requirements. If that were the case, there would be only one bulk variance before you this evening on the entire 59 units. One single bulk variance. That's it. But because those standards were not incorporated, again, there is no target to even hit because there are no standards by which to engineer a plan.
Mr. Rowan, what do you think the most expeditious avenue would be to pursue to get this applicant some standards?
I would make a recommendation to town council, or at least put the town council on notification that there is an omission in our ordinance, especially under where it references R3 development, and there's a void here that we're asking them to determine. Now, you can make suggested changes, you can go
We
back
can
to
do
that
that after
additional
about-
letter, or you can go back and discuss it among yourselves and say,
Yeah.
this is the minimum lot size. We are, as planning board, are proposing, and send it to council. Now, council can say, well, that's great, or no, we're gonna do something different. But I kind of agree with everybody, the board, the applicant, the engineer, that everybody needs to know what the standard is. You know, we have residents that are obviously here tonight, and they've heard that, well, our ordinance says that it's permitted townhouses, but we can't tell them what the standards are.
Right.
So, if there was a gap, it could have been left out, it wasn't this board's fault, it could have been the attendant of this board, that had that removed, and as the chairman so eloquently puts it, that it went to town council, and some, maybe your intent was modified or just taken out, or paid no attention to it.
That was the intent of the board.
But what got adopted, put in print, leaves us all now with, we've got a gap. How do we tell developers what to do? So I can appreciate their position, appreciate this board. The board thought maybe the town adopted something else, contrary to maybe what the board recommended. But at this round, the gap's got to be filled. If ultimately it's not filled, then somebody can come and tell us we have to go. We have to make a stand. So I think that point's not here. Your folks input, the town council, let's let town council set the standard, amend the ordinance. At least applicants know what's, what they're going to be dealing with. And the town knows
I remember the conversation about R1, R3, this is going to be right in the middle, on it to make it R1, R2, let's make it R. And everybody agreed to it, they said, okay, that's what they're going to go with. Now all of a sudden, well, that's poor draftsmanship, that was poor draftsmanship on the planner's part. I'd hang my hat on that, thank you. We didn't want them.
Just set the standards. The woman was the one. Well, right now, the way it's written, Joe, there's no way. Project manager's right, there's no way. Even though the county.
They don't know what to do.
Well, it's too small the way it's written, they keep it that way, that's
They have to set the standard and
Yeah.
then change it.
That would be all the number 10, 27 individual units.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we get quiet here, please? Get your gentlemen.
It puts an undue burden on you folks also. So I think, I agree with, the standards have to be set, and we gotta run that back up to the council.
I'll make a recommendation that our solicitor, Mr. Rowan, send a notification to mayor and council recommending that they review the standards set forth by Leah Furry and either amend them or approve them and put them into place so as we can act upon them.
If that's the board's direction, if you want to use those recommendations, remember, the board can review that before you.
Or we can amend them, on a case-by-case basis. Once we get something in place, I'm speaking for myself, for no one else. Once we get a set of standards in place, we can amend them on a case-by-case basis, just like we do any other, simple lot division.
Once the standard would be set, then if an applicant, whether it's these gentlemen or somebody else, they use those standards,
Right.
they could make adjustments then.
Right.
My recommendation would be to postpone everything until all the principals can get together.
And I think the gentleman said that he would be happy to speak with or attend a, did you say that?
We would be happy to sit down and do work sessions and release a comment on the standards, and during those work sessions, assuming we all agree that the standards are reasonable, we're reasonable people, during that process, you could help, you could yourself as a board have your input in crafting the plan that you would like to see. We can submit a plan, you can go back and forth, and through engineering and review letters, or we can sit down as we do in other municipalities and say, okay, look, we meet the standards, but is there something you want to see now before we go through all the time and expensive engineering this thing and maybe changes to it later? It's all, once we meet the standards, we don't need these variances, but what do you want to see? I'm willing to change my plans to try and build the project that you want to see.
Mr. Rowan, is there any rules regarding the sunshine law as to how many of us can meet together without being in a public forum?
I'll have to check that. I don't think that.
Last thing I want to do is have a meeting that's.
Remember, your
Sunshine
input
law.
is just a suggestion to the township. It's not that you can mandate the township. We can send a letter to to council saying that this is a problem that we are now faced with under our ordinance. We're asking town council to now set the standards. If they want to do a combined meeting, or and if they want to open that, which, obviously the public might want to, be involved. Absolutely, that's the full special meeting. I think the public are here tonight.
That's what I'm saying, they're here for a reason, I don't want to preclude them.
Something's permitted, but we don't have the standards of what we're permitted.
I know what the standard was. I know damn right well what it was. You do that for applause. But where are we? We're in a quagmire here, aren't we?
I think what the board would consider is a motion directing our office to send a letter to town council reflecting what happened tonight and where there is a gap in the ordinance, and we're asking them to set standards.
Now, the applicant, evidently they didn't through the notification twice.
What would happen is this would be tabled when standards are set, and probably at that point, and once they know standards are set, they might not bifurcate their matter, they might just present everything all at once. Would that be If you knew what the standards were, Brian, I mean, when you,
Assuming they're reasonable, yes.
Right.
That's absolutely what
yeah, there wouldn't be bifurcated, it would just be a major site plan, subdivision, presented for your review and comment, open to any comment by the public.
And would you guys be willing to renotice if we need to? We don't know how long it's going to take, obviously, it's not our decision
It
here.
would be required to, yes.
You know,
Yeah, they-
just
they-
so, just so you all know, you would be renoticed when this comes to fruition, if and when it happens, you know.
Some of them weren't.
My recommendation is for the planning board to take no action and work on the applicant's request for postponement.
I believe that there is a transfer in German pending the decision of the town council, and they would not seek any automatic approval because action was not there, application was not acted on. Or they can withdraw, but I think if they don't want to withdraw it because they think they want to come to some end too, which I think would work.
So my understanding is that Fox still picking.
No, they're
We've
waiting.
agreed to waive any.
They're agreeing to waive that.
Okay, I had to have to say.
No, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and that's on the record that they're waiving.
Okay. So we're going to adjourn the meeting?
One, you'll might want to vote on giving our office authority, and that's just your resolution that you're telling me what.
That would be my recommendation.
I'll put that motion on the floor, right, so, that motion on the floor, second.
Motion made by Tim, seconded by Joe. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Now, Mr. Rowan, all in favor?
We'll send the letter to the mayor.
There's no other business to come before the board? Do you have any?
No, I don't believe there was anything else, Mr. Carter, you're talking about.
The only thing we have were things from, John, in reference to your Cedar Properties review letter, that's just a review letter, no action. Okay. Very good.
And Mr. Chairman, my client would be happy to stay and speak with any residents that have any questions regarding the plan. Which
That's what we thought.
we brought numerous copies this
You
evening.
did, that was your suggestion. The meeting now will open to the members of the public that are here that can talk to this applicant on the application and this application only. I would prefer the people that were noticed first to have the audience with the applicant, and then anyone else from the public can also address the applicant. Is that a problem?
No, we're just opening up to the public.
Yeah, the meeting's now open to the public. Anyone wishing to speak to Mr. Leduc? Mr. Leduc, do you want to meet with him privately, or you want to have him?
I want to make sure I got this straight. The applicant applied in 2010, put their application because of the townhouse restrictions. The council approved the resolution for townhouses in 2011.
In the master plan, yes.
Yes.
Anybody know the reason for that? Is that going to help our town?
We tried to get the
Vice
council,
versa.
we tried to get council to address it, and they said they're leaving it in the hands of the planning board.
I hope everybody remembers this election time. All out.
Nobody up here running, Joe.
Not here, but the council's running.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't want any of them else.
Mr. Leduc, do you want a different format? Do you want to talk to people personally, or?
No, we'll be happy to, we're going to stay, and we have, numerous plans, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, sir.
My name is Mike Seek. I live at 821 with Steve Shannon. I'm sure my situation here is probably a little bit different from the rest of the people. I've been a resident of Runnymede since May of 2006. What I can tell you is that obviously since 2006 there have been issues with the economy and things happen. But I can tell you right now that in the 6 years I've been in Runnymede, I'm upside down on my house. So my fear is that if I have to move or need to move, or I already can't refi my home. And it is what it is, and that's the way it goes. and that's, you know, the bed I sleep in. The concern I have is that with the, if I understand correctly the way that the plans were, the townhomes would be built directly behind where I live. So the issue I have is, or I guess the question I would have is, what is the anticipated devaluation of my home as a result of it?
That would require at least a real estate person to keep on, any of us are qualified to keep on that.
I'm going to propose to the board that the board actually adjourn our meeting and allow members of the public to speak. Off the record.
We're anticipating for the $192,000 minimum starting price on any unit in this project. So I'm not sure that's any market value. I'm not sure that's a devaluation. Our townhouse is
All right, does everybody understand?
One meeting, please.
Does everybody understand what's going to transpire? We're going to adjourn our meeting. Mr. Mazook and Mr. Ford have offered to stay here and meet with you all, give you some plans, have a little get-together about any questions you might have, rather than making you all come one at a time, and make it a little bit easier for you guys. And so we're going to adjourn, we'll stay out of it, and you will be re-noticed when this comes back.
Motion to adjourn.